Good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's July the 9th, 190th day of the year. Just 175 days remain to the year's over with. Holidays and observances. Fashion Day. From bold prints to sleek lines, express yourself through clothing. It's considered an art form. National Dimples Day. National Sugar Cookie Day. Oh, when I used to get those from the bakery, I loved them. Durian Fruit Day. Nunavut Day. That is a celebration that spots right. It's Nunavut's rich culture and heritage. It's a special day filled with communal events, traditional games, dances, communal meals, like pancake breakfast and barbecues. It's a significant event. It began as a celebration of the creation of Nunavut, which officially became a distinct territory, April 1st, 1999. This day commemorates the passing of two key legislative acts by the Canadian Parliament, July 9th, 1993. The Nunavut Land Claims Agreement Act and the Nunavut Act laid a foundation for the establishment, fulfilling a long-standing aspiration for self-government among the Inuit people. National Day of Prayer, Reflection, and Thanksgiving in Montserrat. World Misophonia Awareness Day. It's this disorder has only recently come to the forefront of conversation in the psychological and medical fields. It's often misunderstood and widely underdiagnosed. A lot of folks experience distress from triggers that relate to this auditory condition. Lack of awareness contributes to the issue. It's still a significant problem. So on this particular day, we want people to be aware of it. National Don't Put All Your Eggs in One Omelet Day. Call it a Horizon Day. What's over that next hill? Usually it's another hill. Argentina's Independence Day. Great British Pea Week. Wimbledon, that goes on until Sunday the 13th. Rabbit Week. Running of the Bulls in Pamplona. There's something you ever wanted to do. To me, running with the Bulls would not be one of them. Did that as a kid. Tour de France, which goes on to the 27th. National Transplant Week. Trans Triplets and More Week. Famous people born on this date. O.J. Simpson. He looked for the killers until the day he died. Tom Hanks. Jordan Belfort. Courtney Love. Jimmy Smits. And Riley Reid. Well, on that note, let's see what stories we have in the news. Searches are still going on for the people who died in the flood. Now we got flooding in New Mexico. Well, one thing I always heard growing up is the chickens always come home to roost. When President Trump was elected in 2016, Hillary Clinton's campaign paid for the creation of something called the Steele dossier, which purported to be proof that Trump colluded with the Russians to fix the election. Well, now, almost 10 years later, the FBI has launched a criminal investigation of John Brennan and James Comey, two officials who did everything they could to overthrow Trump. It was Crossfire Hurricane. CIA Director John Ratcliffe referred Brennan for criminal investigation to the FBI. They made false statements to Congress, according to Justice Department officials. CIA Director John Ratcliffe referred evidence of wrongdoing by Brennan to FBI Director Kash Patel for potential prosecution. Sources say the referral was received and criminal investigation is open and underway. Of course, at this point in time, of it being an ongoing investigation, the DOJ sources declined to provide further information. It's not really known how extensive the investigation is. There's also a investigation underway in regard to James Comey, who was the head of the FBI at one time. Two sources described the FBI's view of the whole issue as it was a conspiracy, which opens up a wide range of potential prosecutorial options. Of course, neither Brennan nor Comey responded to Fox News' request for information. The Brennan investigation comes after Ratcliffe declassified the lessons learned to review the creation of the 2017 Intelligence Community Awareness Assessment. The 2017 assessment alleged Russia sought to influence the 2016 presidential election and help then candidate Donald Trump. But in reviewing that assessment, it was found that the process of the assessment's creation was rushed with procedural anomalies, and that officials diverted from intelligence standards. Everyone was determined to get Trump, which is what the Democrats are trying to do right now. Now, it's pretty much overlooked that the basis of everything was the Steele dossier, which was actually ordered and paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign. Of course, nobody dares look at her. And had she been president, we would have a queen right now. You know she would not have let go of that power. But the CIA report makes it very clear Trump was framed. Top spy chiefs pushed the discredited Steele dossier despite numerous warnings from Russia experts. It was not true. The theory was we get rid of him and then we explain it later. It's now come out beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Steele dossier was secretly financed by Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and the Democrats. Conceived by a foreign agent with a checkered past in espionage and brokered to collaborators at the FBI, the CIA, Department of Justice, and, of course, the media. Well, the so-called Obama bros have finally reached a stopping point. The far left saying Texans brought on the flood disaster by supporting Trump. See, the Democrats lay everything negative at Trump's doorstep. It's like we used to say when I was growing up, you throw enough stuff at the wall, something's going to stick. These are former Obama aides. They've got a podcast called Pod Save America. Several Democrats and media outlets across the country have been quick to politicize the flooding in Texas. that killed more than 100 people by blaming climate change, Trump racism, and government cuts. But it came out here that a lot of the funds that should have been used to upgrade the emergency notification systems were diverted to be used for undocumented immigrants. And I know from my own experience, I went to my local congresswoman for assistance on an issue to do with the VA, and her office laughed at me. And I helped the woman get elected. I thought she was a friend. And she said, I don't have time for the little problems of veterans. I'm more concerned about the needs of undocumented immigrants. And in fact, her office also told me that one of her senior advisors told me that they would not process any congressional complaints from me because I didn't understand the needs of undocumented immigrants. In regard to this claim by the left that the cuts to the National Weather Service was the main cause of all the deaths, now the Weather Service did what it was supposed to do. It sent out timely warnings. People just didn't hear them. And when the floods happened, the sirens didn't go off because they hadn't been kept up. The Department of Homeland Security is investigating that very issue. President Trump had nothing to do with it. Well, the Chicago mayors vowed the city police will never, ever cooperate with ICE. In fact, there's been, according to the former border czar, there's been 500% increase in assaults against ICE agents in Chicago as they continue to push their sanctuary policies. When Johnson press conference said, again, it's unconscionable at a time in which so many working people and poor people need government to show up for them. This administration has caused so much consternation and division, referring to the ICE raids and the arresting of undocumented immigrants. He was responding to a question about whether the city would set up local police perimeters around schools to shield students from federal agents without warrants. In other words, they're pushing for another civil war. But that's the left media. They always have, they always will. Well, President Trump's big, beautiful bill, as it is called, will even impact K through 12 education. Advocates say millions of children across the country benefit from the bill's school choice policy. American Federation for Children, President Tommy Schultz told Fox that they've been working on that legislation for 10 years. Every state will have the opportunity to potentially have school choice thanks to tax credit scholarships, which allow any individual in America to donate $1,700 to a local scholarship group. And they get a full 100% tax credit, dollar for dollar. Well, among the many people who inhale anything on the internet about medicine, my wife is one of them. She's been in the medical field for, good Lord, almost 60 years. In case you're wondering, we're old folks. And experts are saying there are 11 lifestyle changes that could ward off Alzheimer's. Now, Alzheimer's starts in your brain decades before you have any symptoms. And this came from Dr. Daniel Ayman. He's an acclaimed psychiatrist and brain disorder specialist. And he says it's never too early to think about protecting your brain and your mind. I mean, one place you can go to be assured of all the Alzheimer's medication you could ever want is Congress. That organization orders more of it than almost any place else in the country. Because a lot of our elected officials are old. Some get elected and never leave. Look at Feinstein and Pelosi. Now, low blood flow is the number one brain imaging predictor of Alzheimer's disease. Alcohol, marijuana, caffeine, nicotine, sedentary behavior, and excess weight or obesity can all decrease the blood flow to the brain. To promote blood flow, he suggests walking like you're late. Walking 30 minutes a day. Alternating between 3 minutes of normal walking and 3 minutes of fast walking. He says do that 5 times for 30 minutes and it increases the blood flow to your brain. Now, retirement and aging are two things that also help cause problems. He encourages retirees to learn something new every day to keep the brain active and healthy. I was forced to retire at age 49. And I was going to play video games. My wife walks in and says, I'm not retired. You're not retired. Go write another book. Well, I now have almost 80 books out there. You can go to Amazon, look up Ken Hudnall. I got everything from UFOs to conspiracies. Inflammation is a major cause of psychiatric issues, as well as conditions like cancer, arthritis, and heart disease. Flossing is an easy way to reduce inflammation in the gums and help prevent gum disease, which is a gateway to brain disease, according to the doctor. And of course, genetics. He said genes aren't a death sentence, but they should be a wake-up call. Head trauma. When I had my stroke, they say it was a brain bleed caused, they said, by trauma. He said concussions and head trauma are major causes of psychiatric problems. He said don't text and drive. And of course, there are toxins like alcohol, marijuana. And some not so obvious toxins can include lead and mold, and thanks to incompetent roofers and crooked inspectors and VA officials who have their hand out for kickbacks, we're exposed to mold on a daily basis. Mental health state. Stop believing every stupid thing you think, he said. Keep your body healthy and immune from infections is key to overall health. Optimize vitamin D intake, which helps support the brain and the immune system. Neural hormones. Recommended having a hormone balance check done every year. Any imbalance can interfere with the brain and increase Alzheimer's risk. Diabesity is a term referring to the parallel occurrence of obesity and type 2 diabetes. And of course, sleep is crucial for a high-functioning brain. An adequate night's slumber washes the brain every night, he said. Better sleep translates to improved memory, energy, blood flow, and decision-making. Should be a priority when working to prevent Alzheimer's. All right. War in Ukraine still going on. NATO jets scrambled, and it's to Russia's largest drone attack on Ukraine. Zelensky wants stronger sanctions after 728 drones target multiple Ukrainian cities. Well, they're finding six-figure salaries in some of the strangest places. A new era of restaurant workers. They earn six-figure salaries and benefits that no other industry can provide. Fast casual chains are fighting worker shortages with unprecedented benefits and advancement opportunities. I mean, waiting tables and serving up food and drive-through may seem like the first step into the workforce, but for some folks, it's a pathway to big money. Well, Zoran Mamdani is advocating a radical plan to redistribute housing in New York City to the homeless. He is pushing his socialist plan. He thinks the way to do it is, as he said, tax the whites, give everything anybody wants to everybody else. Well, Good Morning America 3 is rocked with the latest shakeup as rumors swirl about that trouble show. They keep losing their talking heads. Utah Beth, one more time, a Utah Bath and Body Works manager said she was fired over the company's pronoun policy. She's a Mormon, said her religious rights were violated when she was terminated for misgendering a co-worker. Wisconsin man filed an equal opportunity complaint for being fired for a biblical belief in two genders. Now the left has done this country a major disservice. You know, Senator Bernie Moreno says ICE agents are the hardest working people you ever meet. And the most threatened, to be perfectly frank. Gary Coleman's ex-wife has failed a key question in a polygraph about the actor's fatal fall. That fall killed him, and now they're wondering if, in fact, he had assistance in that fall. Well, and some of the Prime Day deals deal with generators, power packs, and more. We're heading into a future that, for example, here we've had a number of power outages over the last few weeks. Biden campaign tapped a 24-year-old social media whiz to post the president's dropout letter, according to a new book. It was a behind-the-scenes scramble as the Biden campaign collapsed on November 5th. His campaign staffers scrambled to roll out the then president's announcement he was dropping out of his re-election race. They tapped a trusted 24-year-old social media whiz to publish his letter with little warning or detail to the bombshell reveal. Now, after the fact, the truth is finally coming out. Well, Trump administration has formally subpoenaed Harvard University over foreign student information. DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin told Fox Harvard's making them do things the hard way. Joy Behar is trying to get Andrew Cuomo to appear on The View. Now, Cuomo did not drop out, even though he lost the primary. I suspect he's going to run as an independent. Israel Trust for Justice exposes Hamas's systematic sexual violence campaign during the October 7th massacre. The Dinah Project hopes report will become a legal blueprint to prosecute Hamas. And they called on the UN to blacklist the terror group, even though there are people in the UN that think that Hamas hung the moon. Monsoon rains have triggered deadly flash flooding in New Mexico, just as bad as in Texas, leaving 3 dead so far. Georgia police officers broke into a car parked outside a mall with 2 children inside. They heard the children crying and noticed a little boy and a little girl trapped inside the hot car on June 4th. Cobb County Police Department released body cam footage of the rescue, which took place on June 4th. A woman called 911 at about 1 p.m. to report a little boy and a little girl trapped inside a hot car in a parking lot outside of Dick's Sporting Goods. Windows are cracked, but it was still hot. The Mars, the makers of M&Ms and Skittles, have yet to join the voluntary pledge to end the use of synthetic food dyes, and they're pushing back on RFK's Make America Healthy Again initiative that bans synthetic food dyes. All right. It's now been revealed that Christine Brennan wrote a book about Caitlin Clark, and said Caitlin Clark never had a chance of making the Olympic team. It was questioning about her being left off the roster. She proved she was number 1, but she was left off and never had a chance. Powers that be in the women's game didn't want her on the team. No matter how well she played, no matter how convincing most basketball experts were that she was getting better daily, but she just wasn't wanted. And I'd run against things like that. Radio clerics are called for Trump's execution. But that's okay because it's Trump. If there's any other, for example, if they said we want to execute Obama, there'd be a worldwide uprising because he's a god. Well, an anti-Israel professor has cursed out the University of Chicago as being a colonialist. But that's okay, because they're attacking Israel. All right. On that note, we're going to turn to our topic for today. We've been talking about little known things that have happened. Like Operation Wash Tub was talked about yesterday. Growing up, I heard there was a singer, country singer, Ernest Tubb. And I had a cousin who swore that Ernest Tubb's first child was named Wash. Well, in the space program, there have been a lot of secrets. And there's long been stories that the Soviet Union secretly launched cosmonauts who died. Before Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space in 1961, there have been a number of rumors already circulating in Western intelligence circles and independent media that the Soviet Union had launched other manned missions that failed and were erased from the official record. Now, during the Cold War, USSR operated its space program under what you might refer to as an iron curtain of secrecy. Like NASA, Soviets never publicly acknowledged the launch till it was proven to be successful. And this left room for a lot of speculation, especially when Western intelligence and amateur radio enthusiasts began detecting strange anomalies. I knew a number of shortwave enthusiasts who claimed that they heard the voices of men and women in space. Most notable among those who claimed this were Giudice Cordiglia brothers, two Italian amateur radio operators based near Turin. Started in 1957, Achille and Giovanni Barista Giudica Cordiglia used homemade equipment to monitor Soviet space transmissions. And over the years, they claimed to have recorded several distress signals from cosmonauts in orbit. There were people gasping for air, stating they were off course, or they simply would go silent in mid-conversation. Among the most controversial recordings made by these two brothers, in May of 1960, a faint panic voice, which appeared to be a female cosmonaut, spoke Russian phrases like "I'm hot, I can see flames, and this is not Earth." You do have to wonder where they were at. November 1960, what sounded like a cosmonaut's heartbeat and labored breathing was heard, followed by silence. And in February 1961, a male voice was heard saying, "I'm losing control, I'm going to crash." Well, the brothers provided transcripts and audio, but the Soviet officials denied all these missions ever took place. Now, among the critics of the brothers were several who said they weren't fluent in Russian and they misinterpreted the signals. At least nobody claimed it was a weather balloon. Still, a lot of researchers note the consistency and timing of their recordings, always shortly before known Soviet space announcements. Everybody knows Gagarin as the first Soviet cosmonaut, but actually, he wasn't the first. Another theory revolves around Vladimir Ilyushin, decorated Soviet test pilot and son of aircraft designer Sergei Ilyushin. Several Western journalists and defectors claim he was launched into space days before Gagarin was, and the crash landed in China due to orbit failure. According to this version, he was injured and held by the Chinese before being quietly repatriated back to the Soviet Union. Soviet authorities, eager to preserve the image of an unblemished triumph, covered it up, replaced him with Gagarin as the first. And while there's no official confirmation, multiple books, including those by U.S. journalist James Oberg and French authors Thierry Massin and Robert Chéreau, reference Ilyushin's supposed flight. Now, Chinese records from that period of time are silent, and Ilyushin never publicly commented. Declassified CIA documents from the early 60s referenced unconfirmed Soviet space launches and anomalous radar signatures, possibly tied to manned space flights. One report noted evidence suggestive of launch activity inconsistent with public announcements. But there are no documents that specifically offer smoking gun proof. Some believe the Soviet space centers in Kazakhstan and Kaspusan Yar were used for secret flights. Others cite internal USSR space program memos referring to deceased candidates not found in public list of cosmonauts. Now, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, several internal program records were released, but there are gaps. Russian officials consistently denied the lost cosmonaut theory. Still, even respected Soviet scientists have acknowledged the possibility of unrecorded fatalities in early testing phases. In fact, the chief cosmonaut trainer, Nikolai Kamanin, once wrote in his diary, "The Americans think we're hiding something. Maybe they're not completely wrong. We never told the full story." There were no confirmed names, no graves, only whispers and static and Cold War shadows. Now, speaking of space, how many know that the Army put together a plan for a moon base? It was called Project Horizon. The secret U.S. Army plan to militarize the moon. Well, this document was classified in 1959. And it wasn't released or declassified until 2000. Now, before Neil Armstrong ever set foot on the moon, the U.S. military had plans not just to visit it, but to occupy it. In 1959, the Army quietly commissioned Project Horizon, a top-secret proposal to build a fully functional military base on the lunar surface by 1966. And this wasn't just a vague concept. It included architectural blueprints, launch schedules, soldier training plans, supply logistics, and even nuclear-powered systems. The program was estimated to cost about $6 billion. That's about $60 billion today. And it was so advanced in scope that some of its details remained classified for over 40 years. Now, at a time when NASA was just beginning operations, it was only formed in a year before, the Army, specifically the Army Ballistic Missile Agency, or ABMA, was moving fast under the direction of Werner von Braun, former Nazi rocket engineer who turned American space visionary. He was one of those brought over under Operation Paperclip that I talked about yesterday. Project Horizon was part of a broader Cold War strategy to establish military supremacy in space before the Soviet Union could. A 190-page proposal was put together that said the moon should be considered the ultimate high ground in future conflicts. And they proposed a permanent base that would house 10 to 20 soldiers serving as surveillance and early warning posts and would support missile systems capable of striking Earth-based targets. According to the report, to be second to the Soviet Union in establishing an outpost on the moon would be disastrous to our national prestige and in turn to our democratic philosophy. Now, the plans, and I've read them, they were nothing short of audacious. They proposed 147 Saturn-class rocket launches to take place between 1961 and 1966 to transport 245 tons of equipment and personnel to the moon. They're basically built by burying pressurized aluminum cylinders beneath the lunar soil to shield inhabitants from radiation and micrometeorites. They're going to use portable nuclear reactors to generate electricity. An Earth-Moon relay station will be established for 24/7 secure contact. And while not explicitly detailed in the original proposal, internal memos and military strategy documents reference potential tactical uses, including the installation of nuclear weapons. And even more startling, astronaut soldiers will be trained to live long-term in lunar conditions and operate military hardware in low gravity. Now, the internal documents show that Project Horizon is part of a turf war between branches of the military, particularly the Army and the Air Force, over who would control space operations. Air Force had its own plans for a space station called Project Lunix. The interagency rivalry eventually slowed both of them down. NASA, created to establish a peaceful civilian presence in space, became the publicly visible face of America's space ambitions. But behind the scenes, military leadership continued developing Horizon quietly through 1959. A full feasibility study was completed and presented to the Pentagon. But no public mention of that program was ever made until after the year 2000. Now, having spent most of my adult working life either in the military or in government service, I can assure you when a government agency starts something, they don't just abandon it and walk away. I think it continued long after it officially was stopped. Now, Project Horizon was effectively shelved, allegedly, when the Eisenhower administration prioritized NASA and civilian-led exploration over militarization of space. In the mid-60s, budget constraints and diplomatic concerns, especially about violating the still being developed outer space treaty, killed off the project entirely. That was for public consumption. Was it true or not? I doubt it. But of course, the plans were never destroyed. In 2000, the U.S. Army declassified the full report, which is now publicly available through the U.S. Army Center for Military History. The release surprised a lot of space historians, not only because of the detailed nature of the proposal, but because it revealed how seriously the Pentagon had actually considered militarizing the moon. Today, few Americans know that before the Apollo program ever took shape, the Army had drawn up a blueprint for lunar colonization, backed up by nuclear power and Cold War urgency. Now, among those who were among the testimonies and source documents for showing this was real was Werner von Braun's letters and writings. The one more famously associated with NASA. His early work at the Army Ballistic Missile Agency directly contributed to the creation of Project Horizon. His letters reference strategic outposts beyond the Earth. Then there's Project Horizon Volumes 1 and 2, released in 2000. These reports contain exhaustive details, technical diagrams, timelines, personnel requirements, and logistics. The archives of the Army Ballistic Missile Agency, housed in Huntsville, Alabama, go into some detail about it. And the National Archives declassified files contain memos discussing the feasibility of potential conflict with NASA's charter. Now, Project Horizon was buried beneath bureaucratic silence, the later success of the Apollo program. Openly militaristic aims would have violated international norms and possibly escalated tensions with the USSR. As a result, it became one of the many Cold War programs locked away until it was politically safe to admit its existence. It wasn't science fiction by a long shot. It was real. Drawn up by real generals and real engineers and lawmakers. Closer to becoming reality than most people realize. The moon almost became a military base before it became a symbol of human peace and exploration. Now, there's been a lot of writings that I've seen about astronauts and unmanned craft actually detecting structures on the moon. And of course, most people laugh at it, but in actuality, it may be part of Project Horizon. Well, in El Paso, Texas, there's a mansion in the historic area. It's always been referred to as the Albert Fall Mansion. And you may wonder what that has to do with anything. But he was involved with what was known as the Teapot Dome scandal. It was, the story I'm going to cover now is called the Teapot Dome Oil for Secrets Extension. It seems that what we were taught in school was only half the story. And when you hear Teapot Dome, you often think of a straightforward corruption scandal. U.S. Secretary of the Interior leasing naval oil reserves in Wyoming to private companies in exchange for bribes. But most people don't know is this scandal may only scratch the surface. Behind the public fallout was a tangled web of international petroleum politics, covert intelligence cooperation, and transatlantic oil deals, involving not just U.S. corporations, but British firms and military strategists operating in the Middle East. A lot of declassified memos and redacted telegrams and long-sealed trade agreements suggest Teapot Dome was merely the domestic tip of a much larger, darker iceberg. Now, between 1921 and 1923, under President Warren G. Harding, Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall secretly leased U.S. Navy petroleum reserves at Teapot Dome, Wyoming, and Elk Hills, California, to private oil tycoons Henry Sinclair and Edward Doheny without competitive bidding. In return, he got over $400,000 in loans and cash and livestock. Wound up with a mansion here in El Paso. Scandal broke in the early 1920s, exploded into a national controversy. Fall was convicted of bribery, the first former cabinet member to go to prison, and the leases were actually canceled. And that story became a symbol of corruption and influence peddling. But the theory was, with his conviction, that ended it. But as Paul Harvey used to say, let's talk about the rest of the story. The declassified records from British and U.S. archives indicate that about that same time, British petroleum interests were in secret talks with American oil companies, including Gulf Oil and Sinclair, about sharing drilling rights in Mesopotamia. Now, that's modern-day Iraq, which was then under a British mandate. It wasn't just about corporate expansion, it was about military positioning. The British Admiralty, which had converted its navy from coal to oil during World War I, was determined to secure stable access to Middle Eastern oil. Simultaneously, the U.S. Navy was expanding its fuel reserve strategy. So a cross-Atlantic alliance began to form, unofficially tying private oil companies to state intelligence agencies. There's one internal British Foreign Office memo from 1923 that said American oil interests may prove essential in preserving access to the Basra fields and form an understanding with their navy can be secured through intermediaries in Wyoming. And who was that intermediary? Well, some researchers believe it was Harry Sinclair, who had connections not only with Albert Fall, but also at foreign business entities. U.S. documents from the National Archives, some of which are still heavily redacted, show a flurry of cable traffic from the Department of State, Navy, and Commerce during the years 21 to 23, referencing naval fuel coordinations, Project ME. It's believed ME stood for Middle East. Now, a Freedom of Information Act request, filed in 2003 for the complete documentation of international oil agreements involving the Navy reserve fuels between 1919 and 1924, was partially granted. But 86 pages were withheld in full. Government cited foreign government sensitivity and national security exemptions. British archives confirmed the files regarding British Petroleum's dealings with Sinclair Oil from that same period, also heavily redacted until the 2010s when portions were partly made public. But key names and locations were blacked out. Now, this pattern of secrecy on both sides of the Atlantic suggests that the oil for access arrangements were not just about profit. Oh no, they were tied to long-term military readiness, resource control, and preparatory steps for what would become the World War II resource strategies. Now, there were a number of witnesses and whispers, and a lot of things took place and never made the papers. Raymond T. Baker, former director of the U.S. Mint and close associate of Albert Fall, told the Senate subcommittee in 1928 that European actors had fingers in the pie, far beyond what the press cared to explore. 1922 British diplomatic cable, which is now held by the UK National Archives, warned of overexposure of American leases, potentially undermining Basra exploration cooperation. And British petroleum consultant Sir Walter Leverton later wrote in his memoirs, "The Americans had their teapot dome, we had our silent domes in Persia." Well, these connections were deliberately avoided in public hearings, likely because they involved joint military commercial coordination during peacetime. And even now, there's no official record in U.S. history textbooks about these foreign oil alliances tied to the scandal. Now, Teapot Dome is taught as a closed case of domestic corruption. It's neat, contained, and politically useful. But if you dig a little deeper and ask the right questions, it reveals a pattern of global maneuvering over energy resources, intelligence coordination, and shadow diplomacy that predates the CIA and the NSA. Unlike later scandals like Iran-Contra or MK-Ultra, Teapot Dome's international tentacles were never investigated. In fact, they were quickly buried. And because the players are primarily corporate, not intelligence agents on paper, the web was easy to conceal through legal technicalities and classified trade agreements. Today, a lot of the documentation remains redacted under post-World War I secrecy acts, both in the U.S. and the U.K. But what is available makes one thing clear. Teapot Dome wasn't just a domestic bribery scandal. Oh no, it was part of a larger undeclared oil war, fought in boardrooms and back rooms and diplomatic corridors. Well, we talked about yesterday the Skeleton Lake, where all these skeletons were found that nobody can explain. But that's not the only place that such a situation took place. We're going to talk about the Malaysian mass graves. Wayne Keelan, 2015, the jungle horror they tried to hide. In May of 2015, deep in the mountainous jungle terrain along the Malaysia-Thailand border, a very gruesome discovery was made. 130 decomposing bodies were found, some little more than skeletons. They were unearthed from shallow graves in the remote area of Wayne Keelan in the Pearl Estate. Nearby, makeshift camps and cages were found. These were actually human trafficking compounds where men, women, and children were held captive, abused, and likely murdered. At first, Malaysian authorities acknowledged the horror, and then overnight, the story disappeared. The initial report came from Thai security forces who, during an anti-smuggling operation, stumbled across these camps with torture equipment and barbed wire enclosures and dozens of graves. They coordinated with Malaysian authorities and revealed a chain of prison-like camps believed to be used by the Rohingya and the Bangladeshi smuggling syndicates. The Malaysian government confirmed 139 grave sites and 28 holding camps, said to be big enough to house 300 people. Victims are believed to be mostly Rohingya Muslims, leading ethnic cleansing in Myanmar and Bangladeshi migrants desperate for work. Now, a lot of these bodies showed signs of starvation, disease, and even torture. Shackles, ropes, and chains were found throughout the area. But what began as a rare moment of transparency turned into suspicious silence. Almost immediately after the international press got the story, the Malaysian government began to downplay the entire incident. Investigations were stalled. No government officials were held accountable. The camps were destroyed before forensic teams could finish collecting evidence. And, most suspicious, journalists were barred from returning to the site. In June of 2015, veteran journalist Zachary Abuza wrote for The Diplomat. He said the speed at which Malaysian officials shut down access to the site and silence coverage is deeply suspicious. There's almost certainly more going on than meets the eye. Survivors and NGO, that's non-governmental organization workers, alleged the corrupt border officials have long been complicit in the trade. They turned blind eyes or actively profited from the trafficking. Some claim that local authorities even been warned months in advance about the camps, but did nothing. When asked, Malaysian officials said they had no prior knowledge, no evidence of any wrongdoing. In the months that followed, several smuggling survivors and human rights groups spoke out. A 24-year-old Rohingya man interviewed by Human Rights Watch described being held for months in a jungle camp where smugglers beat and starved him until family members could pay ransom. Malaysian NGO Tenaganina reported having previously warned government officials about the trafficking routes and camps as far back as 2013. A leaked police report obtained by the Malaysian Insider claimed officials had seen the camps weeks before the official discovery, but they were given orders from higher up not to intervene. Well, in 2019, a Malaysian Royal Commission of Inquiry was formed under public pressure. Its findings: no clear signs of official involvement, no names were named, and a lot of folks called it a whitewash. But no traffickers were ever prosecuted for the murders. Not a single Malaysian official faced criminal charges to this day. The Wayne Keelan massacre wasn't just a tragedy, it was a scandal that was systematically buried. Now, there was a lot of additional weight added to the mystery. Satellite imagery confirmed camp structures existed for over a year before they were discovered. Survivor maps of freed Rohingya men in the Thai detention centers matched the camp's layout exactly, suggesting that the camps were not only known, but part of a wider network. And several journalists covering the story, including local reporters from the Malaysian Mail, got anonymous threats and warned by the police not to dig too deep. To this day, the full extent of the networks, who profited, who was protected, how many died, remains obscured. Now, unlike mass tragedies or international political implications come into play, the Lang Keelan camps are treated as an isolated, unfortunate incident by global media. The Malaysian government refused further comment, and international outrage faded. In fact, folks are more interested in going after Trump than they were about any of this. But the case reflects a chilling truth. Invisible atrocities thrive where secrecy is enforced and political will is absent. Some secrets aren't just hidden, they're actually erased. Well, we got time for a few words about our next story. The Karachi Sleepy Hollow mystery took place in Kazakhstan, 2013-2015. There was one village that couldn't stay awake. In the small remote village of Karachi in northern Kazakhstan, something deeply bizarre began happening in 2013. Entire families would suddenly fall into a deep, unshakable sleep, sometimes for days at a time. Children passed out at school, farmers collapsed mid-task, some residents awoke with no memories, severe hallucinations, or chronic fatigue that lasted for weeks. Locals called it a sleeping sickness. The media soon gave Karachi a more haunting name, Kazakhstan's Sleepy Hollow. And despite years of official investigation and media coverage, the true cause has never been conclusively proven. A lot of villages believe they were the subject of secret testing or even government cover-ups. The first known mass sleeping episode took place in March of 2013. 6 villagers suddenly fell unconscious for no reason, rushed to the hospital in nearby Esla. Doctors found no neurological anomalies, no trauma, no traces of toxins or drugs. Then it happened again. Early 2014, dozens more had experienced similar symptoms, falling asleep in broad daylight, hallucinating, slurring their speech, experiencing intense vertigo or memory loss upon waking. Some folks remained unconscious for up to 6 days. It wasn't just 1 or 2 people at a time. In fact, in some episodes, entire classrooms or households were struck all at once. Between 2013 and 2015, over 150 residents, nearly a quarter of the population, experienced the condition at least once, and some suffered recurring episodes. Initially, local and national officials denied any pattern, but as international media picked up the story, Kazakhstan's government was forced to act. They sent in teams of doctors and scientists and radiation specialists to Karachi. Their findings? 2015, the government claimed the cause was carbon monoxide and hydrocarbon poisoning from nearby abandoned uranium mine in the neighboring village of Groznogoros. Soviet mining operations had ceased in the 1990s, and decaying shafts were said to leak gases that accumulated under Karachi, especially during the thaw cycles. But this explanation actually raised more questions than it answered. Why were CO levels within legally acceptable limits in every sample recorded? Why did the sickness affect some homes, not others, even in the same row of houses? Why did animals and livestock remain unaffected despite being in the same environment? Government researchers eventually concluded the village was safe but should be evacuated. Something of an odd contradiction, don't you think? 2016, Karachi was officially shut down and most of its residents relocated under state programs. But those who remained and those who had already suffered were skeptical about the whole thing. Well, on that note, we've come to the end of today's show. We'll talk more about Karachi in tomorrow's show. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.